Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. I always hate calling these things breaking news because you're seeing this the day after it happened, but this is breaking news. Francis issued a document that many are calling a further banning of the traditional Latin Mass, and that is not accurate. I'm going to go over why that is. The document itself is extremely short. It's about the equivalent of a paragraph in length. It is not even the follow-up to Traditionis Custodes that most of us were expecting. If you've been paying attention to Catholic news, you know that in the trad sphere, we have been talking about how by April 3rd, the follow-up to Traditionis Custodes was expected that would do a whole host of things. This is probably not that document. Though the release of this document on the 21st of February 2023, a mere 6 weeks before April 3rd, does, in my mind, cast a little doubt on whether that document will come on April 3rd. And I say that because, as I've said in numerous videos in the recent past, we have been gaslit by Rome for the last year, really, with all these false rumors. Some of them rather outlandish, but people ran with them because, well, we live in outlandish times where Francis says and does bizarre things and claims a lot of power for himself. And we have that example in real life happening here. But in the last year, we had a lot of rumors that came and went and didn't happen. And the most notorious of which, that I've cited multiple times in past videos, is the rumor that Francis, during the consistory last year, was going to appoint what was called a coadjutor pope, a coadjutor bishop of Rome. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I had to look it up the first time I saw it. It was a bishop who has the right of automatic succession when the bishop in question that he's assisting retires. No further need for confirmation by anybody else. A coadjutor pope would mean there would be no conclave. There would be no gathering of the cardinals in Rome to decide who was pope. That Francis would do it himself. And you might think, well, that's a whacked out unilateral power move on his part, but there's precedent in this. This has happened in the history of the church before, but not for the better part of 1,000 years. In the last couple times it happened, it wasn't exactly the most popular move with the cardinals, which is why it was done away with. But people thought that this wasn't outside the realm of possibility and that he would do this. And so a couple of commentators who I will not call out because I'm not calling anybody out with this video, they ran with the story, and it didn't happen. But it seemed close enough to reality that I even wrote a script for a video for that. But anyway, my point with all that, with that diversion, is this. The rumored document that's supposed to come on April 3rd or thereabouts may or may not happen, because that's only 6 weeks away and they chose to release something right now. And we'd heard in the news in the last few days that Francis was reviewing a document for release. So we'll see what happens on April 3rd. Holy Week seems like an eternity away because here we are, the morning of Ash Wednesday when you're watching this, and April 3rd is the end of Lent. So anyway, let's get to our story here, which comes to us. We'll do the brief version here so you can just get a summary of this. And it is headline from LifeSite. Breaking news. Pope Francis issues new document limiting the powers of bishops to allow the Latin Mass in their diocese. The new document was confirmed by Pope Francis and signed by Cardinal Roche. So what this document does is addresses the loophole that Traditionis Custodes left open, and that's, well, Canon 87 of the Code of Canon Law. Several bishops, mostly in North America, but elsewhere as well, used the Code of Canon Law, Canon 87 of the Code of Canon Law, to ignore Traditionis Custodes, because Canon 87 allows a bishop in his diocese to ignore dictates from Rome if he believes they will harm his diocese in some way. That's the quick version of it. And a few weeks ago, I did a video about Cardinal Roche writing letters that were clearly form letters to these bishops who had done this, who had used Canon 87 and telling them they did not have the authority to do that, citing Traditionis Custodes, which is a motu proprio, and Canon 87 can override a motu proprio. Well, Francis has issued a document, a very short one, that reiterates Traditionis Custodes, basically, and reiterates what Cardinal Roche had done. And here's the quick summary from LifeSite News. Quote, during a meeting with Roche the day previously, Francis confirmed that, following Traditionis Custodes, certain dispensations are not under the prerogative of the local bishop, but rather are, quote, reserved in a special way to the Apostolic See. These include using a parish church to celebrate the traditional Mass using the 1962 Missale Romanum, erecting a new personal parish to celebrate the traditional Mass using the 1962 Missale Romanum, allowing priests ordained after the publication of Traditionis Custodes, July 16, 2021, permission to use the 1962 Missale Romanum. Signed by Roche, the rescript states that under the provisions of Article 7 of Traditionis Custodes, the Congregation for the Doctrine of Worship, or Congregation for Divine Worship, rather, quote, exercises the authority of the Holy See in the above-mentioned cases, supervising the observance of the provisions. If a diocesan bishop has already given dispensation for such cases in his diocese, the CDW ordered that he should now make such details known to the Vatican, after which Roche's congregation would, quote, evaluate the individual cases, end quote. There's nothing new in this document, except to remind the bishops that Rome has spoken and they don't have the authority to ignore Rome on this issue. The rumored document that's allegedly coming on April 3rd or thereabouts will go further. It will hammer the FSSP and similar groups, if it's real, by not permitting their seminarians to be ordained in the traditional form of ordination, and force them to offer every sacrament except the Mass on Sunday in the new form. It will bar priests from blessing rosaries and the brown scapular and other things, other sacramentals, in the preconciliar form. And it will ban, allegedly, the reverent Novus Ordo, your unicorn Novus Ordo, your parish, your tradition, your modern Mass, your new Mass that has altar rails and the priest facing the tabernacle instead of facing the people, Mass in Latin or with lots of Latin. All of those things are alleged in the new coming document to be prescribed. But that's not this document. This is just a reiteration of Traditionis Custodes. And this close to the date of the alleged new document, it makes me wonder if that alleged new document is actually real or not. We will all find out together. There's a couple comments here that I've seen from some good sources. So the first one comes from Rate Celi's author, New Catholic, their anonymous author there, who calls himself New Catholic. And they said on this, quote, our comment, the whole logic of Traditionis Custodes is that the bishops are supposedly the, quote, guardians of tradition, and therefore of all things related to the sacred liturgy, except when they deviate from the current Vatican radical liberal ideology, in which case they have no rights. It's a clown document from a clown cardinal in a clown pontificate. Nothing serious. It's all a sick joke, and one day it will come to an end. Our struggle is for eternity and for centuries and generations to come, end quote. 100%. That is true. This document rests on the theory, this hyper-ultra-papal theory that says the Pope can do what he wants, whatever he wants, and is bound by nothing, which is a very modern conception of the papacy. This is an ultra-powerful conception of the papacy. Some call it like a maximalist conception of the papacy, and that is a very post-conciliar, post-Vatican I conception, really, of the papacy. And it doesn't really stand up to historic scrutiny. That's another topic for another video entirely. Another response here comes from Dr. Kwasniewski. He said this on his Facebook, quote, naturally, many will be disturbed by the latest news from the Vatican, the, quote, rescript obtained by Cardinal Roche from Pope Francis, authorizing him, legally or not, to continue his assault on the members of the mystical body attached to the ancient Roman rite. I keep thinking of these verses in the Gospels. Jesus said to him, Judas, that which thou dost do quickly. He therefore, having received the morsel, went out immediately, and it was night. See the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 27 to 30. This is your house and power over darkness. See Luke, chapter 22, verse 53. The enemies of the Roman rite know that their time is short and that they must act swiftly to do every possible damage they can to the Church's traditional worship and to the faithful attached to it, before God calls them to judgment and leaves the field wide open to the younger traditionalists. And our Lord in his inscrutable providence is allowing them so to act, even as he allowed Judas to betray him to his passion. But that suffering, that death, that entombment were not the end of the story. We know that. And we also know that this mounting attack on the traditional liturgy and the clergy, religious and laity, who adore God and sanctify their souls, through it will not be the end of the story. We're seeing the last desperate counterattack on the, quote, sacred and great principle of Benedict XVI, which is not his coinage, but simply the Catholic mentality. And it is bound to come crashing down in its self-destructive haste and malice. Indeed, much as Judas took care of himself in the field of blood. Stay strong, be faithful, support your priests, pray for your bishop. We will suffer and fight our way through this obstruction, as God has given us the grace to do through countless obstructions over the past 60 years. End quote. Your takeaway from this document is that your bishop, who might have found workarounds through to the Traditionis Custodes, has found ways through canon law to work around it, has had the rug pulled out from under him. But it does nothing new, not really. All it does is reinforce Traditionis Custodes and the follow-up document, the dubia response that then Archbishop Roach issued on the weekend before Christmas of 2021. That is, quote, all it does. I mean, this is a massive thing, but it is not the big document that we've been told to expect. So that may or may not be coming. I'm a little suspicious that it's coming now because this is merely 6 weeks away, but I've been wrong before. I'm curious what you thought of this. What are your thoughts on this pulling out the rug from under the bishops? Is all of this talk of synodality now just completely laughable and on its face laughable? Is all this talk of the bishops and their authority being respected by Francis and Francis Rome on its face just nonsense with a statement like this? Well, let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.